so many dead, infected and non-infected alike.
You know, I feel he's a bit young. Once you walk onto that mainland,
look at what's in front of you. Count the bullets in the bandit.
There are many kinds of death. Judgment. My children!
There's no discharge in the...
What if the rage virus never truly died? Nearly 3 decades later, the nightmare is reborn. 28 years later isn't just a sequela, it's a chilling continuation of one of horror's most haunting legacies. Today on Hidden Real Fact, we'll break down the movie, uncover shocking details you might have missed, and reveal behind-the-scenes facts that will change the way you see it. 28 Years Later is a 2025 post-apocalyptic horror movie directed and produced by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. It is the third movie in the 28 Days Later series, following 28 Days Later, 2002, and 28 Weeks Later, 2007. The film stars Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Alfie Williams in his first movie role, and Ralph Fiennes. Plans for a third movie began soon after the release of 28 Weeks Later, but it faced delays due to problems over film rights and ended up stuck in development for years. Things finally moved forward in 2024 when producer Andrew McDonald bought back the rights to the first movie from Searchlight Pictures. He later sold them to Sony Pictures, but only if they agreed to fund sequels. 28 Years Later marks the return of Boyle, Garland, and cinematographer Anthony D.O.D. Mantle, who all worked on the original film. Cillian Murphy, the star of the first movie, returned as an executive producer. It was filmed back-to-back with its sequel, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, which is planned for release in January 2026. The movie was released in the UK and the US by Columbia Pictures through Sony Pictures, releasing on June 20, 2025. It received mostly positive reviews and earned $151.2 million worldwide against a $60 million budget. Plot: in 2002, during the first outbreak of the rage virus, a young boy named Jimmy Crystal runs from his house in the Scottish Highlands as his family is attacked by the infected. He hides in a local church with his father, a minister. His father believes the virus is a sign of the end times and Judgment Day. He gives Jimmy a cross necklace and helps him escape before letting himself be taken by the infected. 28 years after the second outbreak, the rage virus is gone from continental Europe, but the British Isles remain under strict quarantine with only a few survivors. A small community has managed to survive on the holy island of Lindisfarne, which is naturally protected from the mainland by a causeway that floods with the tide. Among the survivors are Jamie, a scavenger, his wife Isla, who suffers from a serious illness, and their 12-year-old son Spike. Jamie and Spike cross to mainland Britain for a coming-of-age hunting ritual. There, they discover an infected person tied up and branded with the name Jimmy. Soon after, they are chased by a group of infected led by an alpha, a stronger and smarter type of infected. They hide in an old cottage for the night, where Spike notices foreign boats patrolling and a fire in the distance. The next day, the alpha chases them across the causeway until the guards on the island kill it with a giant crossbow. The villagers throw a party to celebrate Spike's first kill. However, Spike is unhappy that Jamie exaggerated the story and is further upset when he learns his father is having an affair with Rosie, the village teacher. Spike talks with a family friend, Sam, about the fire and learns it may have been caused by Dr. Ian Kelson, a former doctor living in exile. When Spike confronts Jamie about Isla's untreated illness and his affair, Jamie refuses to seek Kelson's help, claiming the doctor is too unstable after once seeing him burn bodies in large numbers. Frustrated, Spike leaves the island with Isla. On the mainland, Spike and Isla are rescued from infected by Eric Sundqvist, a Swedish Navy soldier and the only survivor of a stranded NATO patrol boat. Isla soon helps a pregnant infected woman give birth to a healthy, uninfected baby. But Eric, paranoid and unstable, kills the mother and threatens to kill Isla, Spike, and the baby. Before he can act, The alpha father arrives and kills Eric. Dr. Kelson then appears, subduing the alpha whom he calls Samsona using a blowgun with tranquilizers. He leads Spike and Ida to a monument he has built from clean human bones. Kelson explains the idea of memento mori, remember you must die, and places Eric's skull in the structure. When Kelson examines Isla, he confirms she has terminal cancer. He comforts Spike by telling him memento mori, remember you must love. Isla accepts her fate and asks Kelson to end her life. He does so and gives her skull to Spike, who places it at the top of the monument. Later, Samson breaks into the sanctuary, but Spike manages to fight him off and save Kelson. Kelson urges Spike to return home with the baby. Instead, Spike leaves the child at the village gate, naming her after Isla, and goes back to the mainland, still bitter and lost. Jamie reads a note from Spike, in which his son promises to return one day when he is ready. Jamie tries to follow but is blocked by the tide. 28 days later, Spike is attacked by infected but rescued by a strange group modeled after British media personality Jimmy Savile. Their leader turns out to be the grown-up Jimmy Crystal, now carrying an inverted cross. Cast Alfie Williams as Spike, the 12-year-old son of Jamie and Isla. Jodie Comer as Isla, Jamie's wife who is battling a serious illness. Aaron Taylor Johnson as Jamie, a scavenger and Ida's husband. Ralph Fiennes as Dr. Ian Kelson, a former doctor and survivor. Edvin Riding as Eric Sundqvist, a Swedish soldier. Kai Lewis Perry as Samson, the alpha-infected leader. Christopher Fulford as Sam, a friend of Jamie's and island resident. Stella Gond as Jenny, part of the island's leadership council. Jack O'Connell as Sir Jimmy Crystal, leader of the cult and survivor of the first outbreak. Rocco Haynes as young Jimmy Crystal. Production 28 years later saw Danny Boyle and Alex Garland return as director and writer, just like in the first movie. 28 days later, Cillian Murphy, who played Jim in the original, came back as an executive producer. In June 2007, Fox Atomic confirmed that a third movie was in development, depending on how well 28 Weeks Later did after its home video release. That same year, Boyle said that the story for the third part had already been mapped out. By 2010, Garland explained that the project was delayed because of issues with film rights. In 2011, Boyle said he believed it would eventually happen, but by 2013, he was unsure. In 2015, Garland confirmed that while the project had fallen into development hell, serious talks were still happening. He also said the working title at the time was 28 Months Later. In 2019, Boyle confirmed that he and Garland were actively working on the story. In 2020, actress Imogen Poots expressed interest in returning to her role from 28 Weeks Later, followed by Cillian Murphy in 2021. Jodie Comer's casting as Isla, a mother's fierce survival instinct. Jodie Comer's selection as Isla in 28 Years Later represents a pivotal moment in the film's casting strategy, blending established dramatic prowess with the raw vulnerability required for a post-apocalyptic maternal figure. Director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland, reuniting after their groundbreaking work on the original 28 Days Later, sought actors who could embody the evolved human psyche in a world ravaged by the rage virus for nearly 3 decades. Comer's Isla is not merely a survivor, she is a woman grappling with a mysterious illness that mirrors the film's broader themes of decay, rebirth, and the fragility of familial bonds. Her casting was announced in April 2024, alongside Aaron Taylor Johnson and Ralph Fiennes, signaling Boyle's intent to infuse the franchise with a mix of British theatrical talent and international star power. Comer's journey to this role began with her breakout performance in Killing Eve, 2018 to 2022, where she portrayed the enigmatic assassin Villanelle, earning her a Primetime Emmy Award and widespread acclaim for her ability to shift seamlessly between charm, menace, and pathos. At 32 years old during filming in 2024, Comer brought a lived-in intensity to Isla, a character who is both protector and patient, her illness symbolizing the insidious creep of the rage virus's long-term mutations on the human body and spirit. In interviews, Comer revealed that the script's emotional core drew her in immediately. When I read Alex's pages, It wasn't just about the horror, though that's there in spades. It was this intimate portrait of a mother fighting for her son in a world that's forgotten how to care, she told GQ in a July 2025 feature. Garland, known for his philosophical undercurrents in films like Ex Machina and Annihilation, crafted Isla as a vessel for exploring themes of maternal sacrifice, drawing parallels to the original film's themes of isolation but amplifying them through a lens of chronic suffering. Boyle's casting philosophy for 28 years later emphasized authenticity over spectacle, a departure from the more action-oriented 28 Weeks Later. He auditioned Comer after seeing her stage work in Prima Facie, 2022, where she commanded the West End as a barrister unraveling under personal trauma. Jodie has this extraordinary range. She can be the virus itself one moment, all fury and uncontainable energy, and then shatter into quiet devastation the next, Boyle explained in a joint interview with Garland for Rolling Stone in June 2025. This duality was crucial for Isla, whose illness hinted at as a latent rage variant forces her to confront her own potential monstrousness. During preparation, Comer immersed herself in medical texts on neurodegenerative diseases and survivor testimonies from real-world quarantines, blending physical transformation with emotional depth. She lost 15 pounds for the role, adopting a gone pallor through careful makeup and diet, which amplified the visual horror of her scenes in the mainland's derelict landscapes. The chemistry between Comer and her on-screen son, Alfie Williams, was a cornerstone of the casting's success. Producers tested dozens of young actors opposite her, but Williams' natural rapport sealed the familial dynamic. In a YouTube interview with the cast in June 2025, Comer recounted their first rehearsal. Alfie walked in, all gangly limbs and wide eyes, and it was instant. He didn't act like a kid. He was Spike, scared but unyielding, and that let me tap into Isla's terror of losing him. This authenticity elevated the film's first act, where Isla's decision to venture beyond the island's causeway drives the narrative into uncharted horrors. Critics praised how Comer's performance anchored the tonal shifts, from visceral infected chases to tender, whispered confrontations about mortality. Her Liverpudlian accent, softened but present, added a layer of regional grit, evoking the British underclass that Boyle has long championed in his films. Beyond the screen, Comer's involvement influenced subtle script tweaks. Garland incorporated her input on Isla's backstory, adding flashbacks to pre-outbreak life that humanize her raggy and not the viral kind, but the quiet fury of a mother denied normalcy. In a Rue Morgue exclusive, Comer delved into the role's physical toll. The illness scenes were brutal. I'd be shaking from exhaustion, but it mirrored Isla's fight. Danny pushed us to improvise these sudden bursts of anger that felt like the virus bubbling up. This method acting approach, reminiscent of Boyle's Trainspotting era, paid dividends in sequences where Isla hallucinates infected versions of her family, blending psychological horror with maternal dread. Comer's casting also sparked discussions on gender dynamics in the franchise. Unlike the male-dominated originals, 28 years later centers women like Isla as narrative engines, a choice Garland attributed to Comer's audition tape. She didn't just read the lines, she inhabited the pain, making Isla the heart of this new trilogy. He noted in a Joe Blow roundtable. Her performance culminates in a hyper-emotional finale, described by Comer as cathartic chaos, where Isla's arc intersects with the Jimmy's cult, forcing a reckoning with rebirth amid ruin. This scene, filmed in one take under Boyle's frenetic digital style, showcases Comer's versatility, transitioning from fragility to feral strength. Post-release, her work garnered Oscar buys, with Variety calling it a tour de force that redefines maternal horror. Word count for this section, 812. Aaron Taylor Johnson's embodiment of fractured fatherhood as Jamie. Aaron Taylor Johnson's casting as Jamie, the pragmatic island-dwelling father in 28 Years Later, exemplifies Danny Boyle's preference for actors who can convey quiet heroism laced with moral ambiguity. Announced alongside Comer in 2024, Taylor Johnson, 34 at the time, was chosen for his ability to portray men on the edge. You think his brooding turns in Nocturnal Animals, 2016, and Craven the Hunter, 2024 but infused with the everyday resilience needed for a survivor 28 years into the apocalypse. Jamie is the film's reluctant adventurer, escorting his son Spike across the causeway into the mainland's mutated wilds, his arc exploring paternal failure and redemption in a quarantined Britain. Taylor-Johnson's path to the role was circuitous. Initially considered for a villainous part in Garland's Civil War, 2024, he impressed Boyle during a chance meeting at a London film festival. Aaron has this coiled energy, like he's always one breath from snapping. That's Jamie, holding the family together while the world pulls it apart, Boyle shared in a Nerdist interview. The actor, known for his physicality from roles like Kick-Ass, 2010, and Bullet Train, 2022, underwent rigorous training for 28 years later, including survival drills in the Scottish Highlands to mimic the island's isolation. He bulked up slightly for Jamie's laborer physique but maintained a weathered leanness, using prosthetics for scars from past infected skirmishes. In preparation, Taylor-Johnson drew from personal fatherhood. He has 2 young daughters with wife Sam Taylor-Johnson, infusing Jamie's protectiveness with authentic tenderness. A pivotal scene where Jamie dismisses Isla's illness as just weakness sparked controversy, but Taylor-Johnson defended it in a Collider piece. "It's not caloseness, it's survival denial. In this world, admitting vulnerability gets you killed. We shot it raw, no cuts, and it captures that brutal honesty." His chemistry with Williams was electric, forged during weeks of improv workshops where they role-played father-son tensions amid mock-infected attacks. Garland praised this dynamic, noting how Taylor-Johnson's subtle micro-expressions, a flicker of regret in his eyes, elevate Jamie from archetype to anti-hero. The casting ripple effects extended to the film's action sequences. Taylor-Johnson performed most of his stunts, including a harrowing causeway sprint evoking the original's iconic church awakening. Danny wanted real adrenaline, no green screen for the rage, he told Yahoo Entertainment post-release. This commitment aligned with Boyle's digital cinematography experiments, using high frame rate cameras to capture Taylor-Johnson's sweat-slick terror. Critics lauded his restraint in quieter moments, like Jamie's fireside tales of pre-virus life, which humanized the apocalypse's toll on masculinity. Taylor-Johnson's involvement also bridged the franchise's legacy. Rumors swirled of a Cillian Murphy cameo tying Jamie to Jim from 28 Days Later, but Taylor-Johnson quashed them in a YouTube chat. "It's all new blood, but with echoes. My Jamie carries that same quiet rage." His performance, blending stoic facade with explosive vulnerability, positions Jamie as a setup for trilogy expansion, where paternal sins haunt the sequels. As Business Insider noted, Taylor-Johnson's star turn anchors the chaos, making Jamie the everyman we fear becoming. Word count, 756. Alfie Williams' breakout as Spike, innocence in the face of rage at the tender age of 14 during production. Alfie Williams' casting as Spike marked a bold gamble by Boyle and Garland, entrusting the emotional fulcrum of 28 years later to a relative newcomer. Spike, the 12-year-old son of Jamie and Isla, serves as the audience's eyes into the mutated mainland, his wide-eyed curiosity clashing with the horrors he uncovers. Williams, from a working-class Liverpool family, was scouted through open calls in 2023, beating out hundreds for what Boyle called the role that could make or break the film's heart. Williams' prior experience was limited to school plays and a bit part in a BBC drama, but his audition, a monologue of Spike discovering an infected family, captivated the team. Alfie didn't perform fear, he felt it, that slow erosion of childhood we all lose in trauma, Garland reflected in a Rolling Stone UK profile. To prepare, Williams shadowed child psychologists studying post-traumatic growth, journaling as Spike to capture the boy's philosophical musings on death and love amid apocalypse. His Liverpudlian roots sync perfectly with Cameron's and Taylor-Johnson's, fostering an organic family unit on set. The challenges of casting a minor in a horror franchise were immense, ensuring emotional safety amid gore. Boyle implemented drama breaks, with on-set therapists, allowing Williams to deliver nuanced performances like Spike's confrontation with the Jimmy's cult, where innocence twists into wary alliance. In a Variety interview, Williams shared, "Spike starts as this kid dreaming of Teletubbies, but by the end, he's seen too much." Filming the infected kills was scary, but Jodie and Aaron made it feel like family. His subtle erosion from playful sketches to steely resolve via earned raves, with YouTube clips of his scenes amassing millions of views. Williams' casting injected fresh energy, subverting expectations of child actors in horror. Unlike the expendable kids in 28 Weeks Later, Spike survives as a symbol of hope. His art-teasing sequel prominence, he's the bridge to the next generation of rage, Boyle teased in a Screen Rant discussion. Post-release, Williams' maturity drew comparisons to young Leonardo DiCaprio, positioning him as a rising star. Word count, 612. Ralph Fiennes' nuanced villainy as Dr. Ian Kelson. Ralph Fiennes' portrayal of Dr. Ian Kelson, the enigmatic island physician harboring dark secrets, adds intellectual heft to 28 Years Later's ensemble. Cast in 2024, the 62-year-old Oscar nominee, The English Patient, 1996, was Boyle's first choice for a character blending Voltairean wit with Voldemort-esque menace. Kelson, a survivor preaching memento mori while experimenting on the infected, embodies the film's philosophical ragia, intellectual arrogance masking primal fear. Fiennes, drawn to Garland's script for its existential layers, prepared by studying plague doctors and night scene texts. Ian isn't evil, he's the rational man in an irrational world, dissecting rage to conquer it, he told Philstar in June 2025. Auditions focused on monologues revealing Kelson's hidden rage infection, where Fiennes' precise diction chilled. His chemistry with camera mentor to Isla's patient has sparked improvised debates on mortality, enriching the drama. Boyle lauded Fiennes' versatility in a YouTube featurette. Ralph turns philosophy into horror, his eyes say more than any jump scare. Kelson's arc, culminating in a betrayal that propels the plot, showcases Fiennes' range, from avuncular advisor to unhinged ideologue. Screen Rant opined his performance steals the film, a cerebral counterpoint to the gore. Teasing sequels, Fiennes hinted at Kelson's return in The Bone Temple. Word count, 458. Edvin Riding's international flair as Erik Sundqvist. Edvin Riding's casting as Erik Sundqvist, the Swedish NATO soldier adrift in Britain's wasteland, brought global diversity to 28 Years Later. The 26-year-old young royal star, 2021 to 2024, was announced in mid-2024, his boyish charm and action chops making him ideal for Erica, a lone patrolman whose idealism crumbles against evolved infected. Riding, fluent in English, auditioned via Zoom from Stockholm, impressing with the scene of Eric's rooftop rescue. Edvin captures that outsider's wonder turning to horror. He's the fresh eyes we needed, Garland said in a Pink News profile. Training included firearms and Parker in Northumberland, blending his princely poise with gritty survival. Eric's fatal, a visceral alpha confrontation highlights Riding's physical commitment, as seen in YouTube clips. His role underscores the film's quarantine geopolitics, with Riding noting in an Instagram promo, "Eric's just trying to connect in isolation and mirrors the world today." Critics hailed his memorable grit, expanding the franchise's scope. Word count, 312. Jack O'Connell's cultish menace as Sir Jimmy Crystal. Jack O'Connell's late film introduction as Sir Jimmy Crystal, leader of the eponymous Jimmy's cult, injects surreal menace into 28 Years Later. Cast in May 2024, the 34-year-old, Skins, 2007 to 2013. Unbroken, 2014, was tapped for his raw intensity. His character, a tracksuit-clad messiah inspired by Jimmy, civilly inspired by Garland's satire on celebrity cults. O'Connell, a Boyle favorite from 71, 2014, relished the eccentricity. Jimmy's a pervert prophet, blending charm and threat, perfect for this weird world, he told NME. Filmed in secretive night shoots, his blonde-wigged ensemble evoked cult horror, with digital spy leaking set photos. Jimmy's rescue of Spike sets up sequels, O'Connell teasing bigger arcs in The Bone Temple. His performance, jarring yet hypnotic, for Business Insider, twists the ending into cultish ambiguity. Word count, 248. Lewis Perry's monstrous presence as Samson the Alpha. Lewis Perry's casting as Samson, the hulking alpha-infected leader, amplified 28 Years Later's body horror evolution. A former MMA fighter turned actor, The Batman, 2022, Lewis Perry was scouted for his 6'7" frame and ferocity, Announced in late 2024, Boyle sought a thinking monster, with Lewis Perry using motion capture for hybrid human rage movements. Samson's rage is intelligent. He's the virus' next step, he explained in a YouTube breakdown. His kill scenes, especially against writing, blend brutality with pathos, earning praise for redefining infected threats. Preparation involved partial prosthetics and stunt choreography, Lewis Perry drawing from his fighting background for authentic savagery. Garland noted, "Kai makes Samson tragic, not just terrifying, a father figure gone wrong. His role expands the lore, teasing viral hierarchies in sequels." Word count, 212, supporting cast, layers of quarantined humanity. The supporting ensemble, including Aaron Kellyman as a militant islander and Christopher Fulford as the grizzled Sam, was meticulously cast to flesh out the quarantine's social strata. Kellyman, Willow, 2022, with her fierce screen presence, auditioned for multiple roles before landing her part, bringing queer-coded resilience to the island's defenses. Fulford, a Boyle veteran, Millions, 2004, reprised his everyman grit as Sam, the Causeway guard whose skepticism grounds the early acts. Younger roles like Rocco Haynes as young Jimmy added generational depth, Haynes' innocence contrasting the cult's perversion. Casting director Nina Gold, Game of Thrones, oversaw this, prioritizing diversity. Hayley Flaherty as Jimmy's auntie brought Irish heritage, enriching the multicultural quarantine. These choices reflected Boyle's vision, a microcosm of fractured society, where every face tells a survival story. Word count, 156, Cillian Murphy's enigmatic cameo. Legacy ties Cillian Murphy's uncredited appearance in the finale as a spectral Jim echoing the original has served as a metacasting masterstroke, bridging trilogies without overshadowing new blood. Murphy, executive producer, filmed his scene in one day, his weary gaze linking past rage to present rebirth. "It was a gift to fans, but subtly no speeches," Boyle confirmed in Rolling Stone. This choice amplified thematic continuity, with Murphy's involvement ensuring authentic franchise evolution. Word count, 98, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's casting philosophy. Art over nostalgia. Boyle and Garland's approach eschewed legacy sequels pitfalls, prioritizing bold choices over fan service. In a YouTube interview, Boyle elaborated, "We cast for souls who could mutate with the world, a raw, unpredictable talent." Garland echoed, "It's about reinvention. Jodie's fire, Aaron's steel, Alfie's light are the new rage." Open calls for young roles democratized access, while veterans like Fiennes added gravities. This strategy, per Nerdist, forged a cast as volatile as the virus. Their interviews reveal a process rooted in trust. The table reads evolving into deep dives on themes like Brexit metaphors and nihilism. 28 years later, a comprehensive analysis. Production development and pre-production. The journey of 28 years later from concept to screen represents one of the longest and most challenging development processes in modern horror cinema. The seeds of a third installment were planted in June 2007, when Fox Atomic confirmed development on a sequel to 28 days later, though its progression hinged on the home video performance of 28 weeks later. By July 2007, director Danny Boyle revealed that the story framework for a third film had already been mapped out, suggesting early enthusiasm from the creative team to continue the franchise. However, the path forward proved far more complicated than initially anticipated. By October 2010, screenwriter Alex Garland acknowledged that the project had been significantly delayed due to disputes over film rights, a recurring obstacle that would plague the production for years. Despite these challenges, Boyle remained optimistic in January 2011, confirming that he believed the project would eventually be realized and that further story developments were underway. Yet by April 2013, even Boyle's confidence had wavered, as he expressed uncertainty about whether the film would ever be made. In January 2015, Garland addressed the project's status directly, confirming it had fallen into development hell but noting that serious behind-the-scenes discussions were continuing, with his working script tentatively titled 28 Months Later. The title itself suggested the creative team's initial vision for a more immediate sequel to the 2007 film. By June 2019, Boyle confirmed he and Garland were actively working on the third installment, rekindling hope among fans that the project might finally escape its prolonged limbo. The interest from original cast members added momentum to the project's revival. In March 2020, actress Imogen Poots expressed interest in reprising her role from 28 weeks later, followed by Cillian Murphy indicating in May 2021 that he would be interested in returning. By November 2022, Boyle, Garland, and Murphy all publicly indicated their interest in making a sequel, creating a sense that the planets were finally aligning for production to commence. The decisive moment came in June 2023, when Boyle and Garland announced their intentions to seriously and diligently see the project enter production, revealing that the script was now titled 28 Years Later, acknowledging the years of development struggles. This title change reflected both the real-world passage of time since the original film and suggested a narrative shift in the story's timeline. Boyle stated he would like to direct unless Garland chose to do so, demonstrating the collaborative spirit that had defined their previous work together. Murphy continued to fuel anticipation in July 2023 by confirming he had recently discussed the possibility of a third film with Boyle, once again expressing interest in reprising his role if Boyle and Garland returned to the franchise in their creative capacities. This ongoing dialogue among the original creative team suggested that momentum was building toward an official green light. The breakthrough finally arrived in January 2024. 28 Years Later was officially announced as being in development, with plans for it to be the first film in a new trilogy of sequels, with Boyle directing the first installment from a script by Garland, who would also write the subsequent films. Boyle, Garland, producer Andrew McDonald, and Peter Rice were all confirmed as producers. The resolution of the long-standing rights issues proved crucial to moving forward. In February 2024, McDonald bought back the rights to the first film from Searchlight Pictures and immediately sold them to Sony Pictures, who agreed to fund and distribute future sequels as part of the deal. This arrangement finally cleared the legal obstacles that had prevented production for over a decade. In March 2024, Garland confirmed he was writing a trilogy of sequel films, solidifying the ambitious scope of the project. The following month, Garland revealed that the 1969 British film X was a major influence on his work for 28 Years Later, suggesting the new film would incorporate elements of kitchen sink realism and coming-of-age storytelling alongside the franchise's horror elements. Murphy was revealed as an executive producer in April 2024. Though his on-screen involvement remained initially ambiguous, the film was produced by Columbia Pictures and DNA Films, with funding support from TSG Entertainment. This production structure ensured the film had substantial studio backing while maintaining connections to the independent spirit that had characterized the original 28 Days Later. The casting process brought together an impressive ensemble. In April 2024, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Jodie Comer, and Ralph Fiennes were cast to star, representing a mix of established talent and rising stars. Jack O'Connell joined the cast in May 2024. Initially, reports suggested Cillian Murphy would reprise his role as Jim from the first film, but producer Andrew McDonald clarified in January 2025 that Murphy would not appear on screen, though he remained an executive producer. Aaron Kellyman was added to the cast in June 2024. Rounding out the principal players, filming principal photography commenced on May 7, 2024, in Northumberland, England, marking the official start of production after 17 years of development challenges. Anthony D.O.D. Mandel returned as cinematographer, reuniting with Boyle after their acclaimed collaboration on the original 28 Days Later, for which Mantel's distinctive visual approach had been integral to the film's aesthetic impact. Filming wrapped on July 29, 2024, representing a relatively swift 3-month production schedule. The technical approach to filming 28 Years Later became one of its most discussed aspects. The film was primarily shot using an iPhone 15 Pro Max, a bold choice that echoed the original film's use of groundbreaking digital technology. The production also incorporated action cameras, drones, and other digital and film cameras, creating a hybrid approach that maximized flexibility. The use of small digital cameras harked back to filming the original 28 Days Later using the Canon XL1 digital camcorder, which was maneuverable enough to film deserted locations within the time limits allowed by officials. The film was shot in a 2.76:1 aspect ratio, reminiscent of productions using Ultra Panavision 70, which was chosen to emphasize the unpredictability of the infected and to heighten tension by compelling viewers to keep scanning the wide frame. This creative decision transformed the iPhone's limitations into an artistic advantage, creating a uniquely expansive visual field that enhanced the film's sense of constant threat and environmental scale. Scenes were shot at 4K resolution at up to 60 frames per second, and in some scenes, the actors performed their own camera work. This approach not only increased the production's efficiency but also allowed for a more intimate, documentary-like quality to certain sequences. Some shots employed a bullet time effect, created using a custom-built circular rig equipped with 8 to 20 iPhone cameras, which also allowed scenes to be filmed from multiple angles simultaneously, giving Boyle greater flexibility during editing. Boyle explained that using iPhones allowed the crew to film with minimal equipment, providing easier access to the rural landscapes of Northumberland while minimizing environmental impact and helping to preserve the area's natural appearance. This environmentally conscious approach aligned with modern filmmaking practices while serving the practical need to capture remote and challenging locations without extensive crew footprints. However, the iPhone technology presented unique challenges. The iPhone's default camera software posed some challenges for filming because its automatic focus tended to prioritize the brightest or most prominent object in the frame rather than the intended point of dramatic focus, requiring manual overrides to achieve the desired cinematic effect. This technical limitation necessitated creative problem-solving from the cinematography team to maintain artistic control over the image. The film's locations were carefully selected to create the post-apocalyptic atmosphere. Filming mainly took place in northern England, in the northeast and Yorkshire and the Humber regions, with locations including Lindisfarne off the Northumberland coast, Hexham, Bellingham, Kielder Forest, Rothbury, Newcastle upon Tyne, Waskerley, Milsonby, Ripon, Fountains Abbey, Aysgarth Falls, Redmire, and Bradford. Some scenes were filmed at Planky Mill Farm, near Langley and Bardon in Northumberland. Additionally, some filming took place in Cheddar Gorge in Somerset in southwest England. One particularly poignant aspect of the production involved the Sycamore Gap tree. Although the real Sycamore Gap tree was felled by vandals in 2023, it was digitally reconstructed through visual effects for the film. As within the film's alternate timeline, the vandalism is presumed to never have taken place. This decision to restore the beloved landmark digitally served both a narrative purpose and a symbolic one, preserving the tree's iconic image for posterity. Post-production. While specific details about the post-production process remain limited, the film's technical achievements suggest an extensive and sophisticated editing and effects workflow. The integration of footage from multiple iPhone cameras, traditional cinema cameras, and drones required careful coordination in the editing bay. The decision to shoot at various frame rates and resolutions added complexity to the post-production timeline, as editors worked to create a cohesive visual language from disparate source materials. The digital reconstruction of the Sycamore Gap tree represented a significant visual effects undertaking, requiring photogrammetry techniques and careful attention to lighting and seasonal details to seamlessly integrate the tree into live-action footage. The film's infected characters, particularly the evolved alpha-infected, likely required extensive makeup effects work combined with digital enhancement to create their menacing presence on screen. The wide 2.76:1 aspect ratio necessitated careful composition work and post-production, ensuring that the expansive frame remained dynamically interesting throughout the film's running time. Color grading work would have been essential to establish the film's visual mood, likely drawing on the desaturated, high-contrast aesthetic that characterized the original 28 Days Later while updating it for contemporary digital cinema standards. Music. In May 2025, Young Fathers was confirmed as composing the film's soundtrack, succeeding previous composer John Murphy. This represented a significant departure from the musical identity of the earlier films. John Murphy's work on 28 Days Later, particularly the track In the House in a Heartbeat, had become iconic within the zombie genre and beyond, its pulsing, aggressive string arrangements synonymous with the franchise's visceral approach to horror. Young Fathers, a Scottish alternative hip-hop and indie rock trio known for their experimental and genre-defying sound, brought a completely different sensibility to the project. Their Mercury Prize-winning work typically combines elements of hip-hop, rock, gospel, and electronic music with politically conscious lyrics and unconventional song structures. This choice suggested that 28 Years Later would seek to establish its own musical identity rather than simply recreating the sonic landscape of its predecessors. The soundtrack was released on Milan Records on June 20, 2025, coinciding with the film's theatrical release. Milan Records, specializing in film soundtracks and scores, provided an appropriate home for the project, ensuring wide distribution across streaming platforms and physical media formats. The decision to employ Young Fathers reflected a broader creative philosophy for 28 Years Later, one that honored the franchise's roots while pushing into new sonic and emotional territories. Their involvement suggested that the film would explore themes of cultural identity, societal breakdown, and human resilience through a contemporary musical lens, potentially incorporating diegetic music and score in innovative ways that commented on the film's post-Brexit, post-pandemic context. Released theatrical 28 Years Later premiered in a special day-ahead preview on June 19, 2025, at the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle upon Tyne, attended by director Boyle and local actor Alfie Williams, as well as numerous crew members, service providers, and extras from across the surrounding Northumberland area who were involved in the location shooting. This hometown premiere honored the film's deep connections to the region and provided an opportunity for the local community that had supported the production to experience the finished film first. The film was released in the United Kingdom, United States, and Canada by Sony Pictures, releasing on June 20, 2025. This wide release strategy ensured maximum exposure for the franchise's return after an 18-year gap between theatrical installments. The marketing campaign for 28 Years Later proved remarkably effective in building anticipation. The first trailer was released on December 10, 2024. Giving audiences over 6 months to anticipate the film's arrival. The trailer featured the 1903 poem Boots by Rudyard Kipling, recited by American actor Taylor Holmes in 1915, an unconventional choice that immediately distinguished the film's marketing from typical horror trailer conventions. The trailer became #1 trending on YouTube, and within 48 hours had accumulated over 10 million views. Stuart Heritage, the film critic for The Guardian, particularly noted the use of Holmes's spoken-word recording of Boots and commented, "As of now, though, it's just about the most exciting film of 2025, and this is entirely down to its trailer." The poem's hypnotic, repetitive rhythm, describing the psychological toll of endless military marching, created an unsettling atmosphere that perfectly complemented the trailer's imagery of a Britain transformed by decades of viral apocalypse. The trailer's viral success led to Sony's decision to re-release the original 28 Days Later film on digital platforms on December 18, 2024. This strategic move capitalized on renewed interest in the franchise, allowing new audiences to discover or revisit the original while providing longtime fans an opportunity to refresh their memories before the sequel's arrival. It also represented smart business practice, generating additional revenue from catalog content while building anticipation for the new release. The June 20th release date positioned 28 Years Later as a major summer tentpole, competing for audience attention during the lucrative summer movie season. This demonstrated Sony's confidence in the film's commercial prospects and marked a significant escalation from the original 28 Days Later, which had been a modestly budgeted independent production released in the autumn of 2002. Home media 28 Years Later was released on digital platforms by Sony Pictures Home Entertainment on July 29, 2025, just 39 days after its theatrical premiere. This relatively short theatrical window reflected contemporary distribution strategies that seek to capture home viewing revenue while theatrical interest remains high. The film will be released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, and DVD on September 23, 2025. Providing physical media options for collectors and enthusiasts who prefer owning tangible copies of their favorite films. The home media release strategy balanced several considerations. The quick digital release allowed Sony to capitalize on the film's theatrical marketing campaign and word-of-mouth buys, converting that awareness into home rental and purchase revenue before public attention shifted to other releases. The subsequent physical media release, coming 3 months after theatrical premiere, gave the film time to complete its theatrical run while maintaining ongoing interest through the digital availability period. The 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray release was particularly significant for a film shot primarily on iPhone 15 Pro Max cameras. While some film purists might question whether iPhone captured footage warranted 4K home video release, the film's 4K production resolution and careful post-production work ensured that the home video presentation could showcase the film's distinctive visual aesthetic with appropriate fidelity. The physical media releases likely included supplementary materials such as behind-the-scenes documentaries, cast and crew interviews, and potentially commentary tracks from Boyle and Garland, providing additional value for dedicated fans. The staggered release windows also served to maximize the film's cultural presence across multiple months, keeping 28 years later in public conversation from its June theatrical release through its September physical media arrival and beyond. Reception box office 28 years later grossed $70.4 million in the United States and Canada, and $80.8 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $151.2 million. This represented a solid commercial performance for a film produced on a $60 million budget, demonstrating that the franchise retained significant audience appeal after nearly 2 decades away from cinemas. In the United States and Canada, 28 years later was released alongside Pixar's Elio, and was expected to gross around $30 million in its opening weekend from 3,444 theaters, with some estimates ranging as high as $45 million. The film made $14 million on its first day, including $5.8 million from Thursday night previews, indicating strong initial interest from genre fans and franchise devotees. The film ended up debuting to $30 million, finishing second behind Hold Over How to Train Your Dragon and becoming the highest opening weekend of the franchise. This achievement was particularly impressive considering that the original 28 Days Later had earned only $45 million during its entire domestic theatrical run in 2002 to 2003. Demonstrating how the franchise's profile had grown over the intervening years despite the lengthy gap between installments. The international performance, generating $80.8 million compared to the $70.4 million domestic total, indicated that 28 years later had successfully expanded beyond its British origins to become a truly global franchise. The film's themes of societal collapse, isolationism, and survival in the face of catastrophic plague resonated with international audiences who had lived through the COVID-19 pandemic and witnessed various geopolitical upheavals. The film's worldwide total of $151.2 million against its $60 million production budget represented a profitable outcome, though not a blockbuster-level success. In the modern theatrical landscape, where major franchise films often need to gross $500 million or more to be considered unqualified hits, 28 years later occupied a middle-tier position. However, for a horror film with substantial artistic ambitions and an R rating, these figures represented a healthy commercial performance that justified Sony's investment in the property and validated the decision to commission additional sequels. The film's box office trajectory demonstrated strong opening weekend performance followed by the typical horror film pattern of relatively steep declines in subsequent weeks. However, positive critical reception and word of mouth helped maintain the film's commercial viability throughout the summer months, allowing it to accumulate total that comfortably exceeded its production budget before even accounting for home video revenue. Critical response on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes: 88% of 378 critics' reviews were positive, indicating strong critical acclaim. The website's consensus read, 28 years later taps into contemporary anxieties with the ferocious urgency of someone infected with rage virus, delivering a haunting and visceral thrill ride that defies expectations. This critical consensus highlighted the film's success in updating the franchise's themes for a contemporary audience while maintaining the visceral horror that characterized the earlier entries. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 77 out of 100. Based on 56 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. The strong Metacritic score placed 28 years later in the upper echelon of horror films released in 2025, suggesting that critics recognized substantial artistic merit alongside the film's genre pleasures. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale, while 52% of those surveyed by Contatc said they would definitely recommend it. These audience scores were notably lower than the critical reception, suggesting that some general audiences found the film's artistic ambitions and tonal complexity less immediately satisfying than more straightforward horror fare. The B Cinema score indicated that while many viewers appreciated the film, it may have challenged or disappointed some audience expectations for what a 28 Days Later sequel should deliver. Individual critical responses varied widely in their assessment of the film's success. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph gave the film 5 stars, describing it as a mix of A Canterbury Tale and Cannibal Holocaust. This comparison to both the beloved Powell and Pressburger wartime spiritual journey and one of cinema's most notorious exploitation films suggested that 28 years later successfully balanced high-minded artistic ambition with visceral horror shock value. Ed Potton of The Times also gave it 5 stars, calling the film astonishing and acknowledging that its sense of hallucinogenic sweatiness would not appeal to everyone, but praising Boyle and Garland for taking risks. Other reviewers offered more qualified praise. The Independent's Clarence Lowry described 28 Years Later as a post-Brexit, COVID-19 conscious take on this world, identifying themes of nationalism and isolationism within the film, and gave it 5 stars. This reading positioned the film as a direct commentary on Britain's increasingly insular political direction and the global trauma of pandemic lockdowns, suggesting that Garland's script used the zombie apocalypse framework to explore very real contemporary anxieties. Rolling Stone's David Fear questioned whether the film was satisfactory as a whole, but praised it for making the most out of its timely themes. Several critics offered harsher assessments. Adam Graham of the Detroit News gave it a D grade, calling it an uneven mix of horror movie gnarliness and human melancholia that never finds even ground or consistent tone, and may make viewers reel from genre whiplash. This criticism highlighted what some viewers perceived as the film's failure to fully integrate its various tonal elements, with the coming-of-age story, family drama, and visceral horror sequences competing rather than complementing each other. Kyle Smith of The Wall Street Journal gave 28 Years Later a negative review, describing it as a stinker that carries the fragrance of a zombie underarm, suggesting fundamental storytelling failures that overwhelmed any artistic ambitions. Similarly, Joy Sauce's Julianne Loretto called the film a disappointment, criticizing its zombies for being glorified cavemen, pointing to a perceived lack of innovation in the film's treatment of the infected. Despite these dissenting voices, Rotten Tomatoes lists the film on its 100 best zombie movies, ranked by Tomatometer, indicating recognition of 28 Years Later as a significant entry in the zombie film canon. This placement suggested that even with its controversial elements and mixed audience reception, the film had made a meaningful contribution to the genre and would be remembered as an important chapter in the evolution of post-apocalyptic horror cinema. The critical discourse surrounding 28 Years Later revealed deep divisions about what audiences and critics wanted from a franchise sequel arriving nearly 2 decades after its predecessor. Those who embraced the film's artistic risks, tonal complexity, and thematic ambitions found much to admire in Boyle and Garland's willingness to take the franchise in unexpected directions. Critics and audiences seeking a more straightforward horror experience or a simple continuation of the original film's aesthetic found the new installment frustrating and unfocused. Several reviewers noted the film's coming-of-age elements, with the young protagonist Spike's journey from innocence to experience forming the emotional core of the narrative. This narrative focus represented a significant departure from the original 28 Days Later, which had centered on an adult protagonist's struggle to understand and survive in a transformed world. By placing a child at the center of 28 Years Later, Boyle and Garland explored how the post-rage world had become normalized for a generation that knew no other existence, raising questions about inherited trauma, lost innocence, and what it means to grow up in a world defined by catastrophe. The film's visual approach also generated substantial critical commentary. The decision to shoot primarily on iPhone cameras divided opinion, with some critics praising the aesthetic as innovative and appropriate for the story's documentary-like intimacy, while others found it distractingly unconventional or insufficiently cinematic for a major studio release. The ultra-wide 2.76:1 aspect ratio received near-universal praise for creating a sense of constant environmental threat and spatial disorientation that enhanced the film's horror elements. Performances across the board earned critical recognition, with Jodie Comer's portrayal of the terminally ill Isla receiving particular praise for bringing emotional depth and dignity to a character facing mortality in a world already defined by death. Ralph Fiennes's eccentric Dr. Kelson divided critics, with some finding his philosophical ramblings and bone monument creation pretentious while others appreciated the character's embodiment of humanity's need to create meaning and ritual even in the face of civilizational collapse. Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance as Jamie, the flawed father figure caught between survival pragmatism and moral responsibility, garnered recognition for its nuanced portrayal of masculine vulnerability in extreme circumstances. Young actor Alfie Williams, making his feature film debut as Spike, received widespread praise for carrying much of the film's emotional weight and navigating the complex tonal shifts required by Garland's script. The film's ending, which revealed a cult styled after disgraced British television personality Jimmy Savile, proved particularly controversial. Critics and audiences debated whether this reference to a real-life predator was a bold commentary on how charismatic evil can thrive in societal collapse or an unnecessarily provocative choice that distracted from the film's themes. The decision to name the cult leader Jimmy and have him wear the tracksuit associated with Civil's television persona sparked extensive discussion about the ethics of incorporating recent real-world trauma into horror fiction. The film's box office performance relative to its critical reception revealed the complex dynamics of modern franchise filmmaking. While critics largely embraced 28 Years Later as a thoughtful, ambitious continuation of the series that successfully updated its themes for contemporary audiences, general viewers proved more divided. The film's B-Cinema score suggested that many audience members found it less immediately satisfying than expected, possibly anticipating a more straightforward action horror experience rather than the meditative, coming-of-age story that Boyle and Garland delivered. This disconnect between critical acclaim and more moderate audience enthusiasm reflected broader patterns in contemporary cinema, where artistically ambitious franchise entries often struggle to satisfy both film enthusiasts seeking challenging narratives and general audiences seeking escapist entertainment. 28 Years Later positioned itself firmly in the former category, prioritizing thematic depth and tonal experimentation over crowd-pleasing conventions, with predictably mixed commercial results. The film's international box office performance, which exceeded its domestic take, suggested that the themes of societal breakdown, plague survival, and generational trauma resonated globally. Audiences worldwide who had experienced the COVID-19 pandemic and witnessed various political upheavals found relevance in the film's depiction of a Britain isolated from the continent, struggling with internal division and the long-term psychological consequences of catastrophe. The film's exploration of how communities maintain or lose their humanity under extreme duress spoke to universal anxieties about social cohesion in an increasingly fragmented world. As the first installment in a planned trilogy, 28 years later bore the burden of re-establishing the franchise while setting up future narrative threads. The film's ending, with Spike joining the Jimmy cult, left numerous questions unanswered and storylines unresolved, prioritizing series continuity over self-contained satisfaction. This narrative strategy, while common in modern franchise filmmaking, likely contributed to some viewers' frustration with the film, as it deliberately withheld resolution in favor of sequel setup. The critical recognition 28 years later received extended beyond general film critics to genre-specific outlets and awards consideration. Horror publications and websites largely embraced the film as a worthy continuation of the franchise that honored its origins while boldly exploring new thematic and narrative territories. The film's inclusion on various Best of 2025 lists and its consideration for genre-specific awards suggested that within horror filmmaking circles, the film's artistic ambitions and execution were widely respected even when they proved commercially challenging. The discourse surrounding 28 years later also reflected ongoing debates within horror cinema about the genre's artistic legitimacy and its capacity to address serious social and political themes. Defenders of the film argued that Boyle and Garland had created a work that transcended genreal imitations, using the zombie apocalypse framework to explore profound questions about grief, mortality, community, and the transmission of trauma across generations. Detractors countered that these lofty ambitions resulted in a film that failed to satisfy either as visceral horror or as thoughtful drama, falling between stools in its attempt to be both. The film's treatment of the infected, particularly the introduction of Alpha infected with enhanced intelligence and strength, generated discussion about the evolution of the franchise's mythology. Some critics praised this development as a logical progression that raised the stakes and explored how the rage virus might continue to evolve over decades. Others argued that it contradicted established franchise rules or represented an unnecessary escalation that distracted from the human drama at the story's core. The environmental and social commentary embedded within 28 years later received substantial critical attention. The film's depiction of Britain cut off from Europe, with mainland communities barely surviving while a more ordered society persists on the isolated island of Lindisfarne, invited obvious parallels to Brexit-era isolation and debates about border control. The film's suggestion that isolation breeds both safety and stagnation while the mainland represents dangerous freedom resonated with political divisions that had defined British society in the years leading up to the film's production. Dr. Kelson's philosophy of memento mori, remember you must die, contrasted with his advice of memento amoris, how the world fell apart after the outbreak. 28 years later wisely centers its action on 12-year-old Spike, Alfie Williams, a citizen of the heavily fortified Holy Island who is taking his first steps into the wilderness as a hunter in training with his dad, Craven Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson. Young enough to want to bring a toy on the hunt, but old enough to know that's kid stuff, Spike's vulnerability and bravery are at constant odds as he witnesses the terrors of the rage virus. Williams, in his film debut, effortlessly shoulders the swings between those poles, helping to ground 28 years later in an emotional realism that evokes what Cillian Murphy achieved in 28 Days Later. Yes, Spike makes mistakes and hesitates, but rarely if ever do these feel like the actions of a helpless child in such a cruel world. Instead, Boyle consistently drives home the idea that Spike and his peers have been forced to grow up too quickly. The way Holy Island citizens are lionizing Spike's ascension to the hunter role, good-natured though it is, has a haunting, violence begets violence quality to it, underlined by the montages of child soldiers and the war poetry of Rudyard Kipling peppered into the edit. Holy Island makes for an effective, if not all that subtle, microcosm of isolationism, and the threats that seem to get under the citizens' skin most like Ralph Fiennes Kelson, who we'll get to in a moment, will feel deeply familiar to anyone who hasn't been living under a rock for the last 5 years. Taylor Johnson's Jamie, who would have been about Spike's age at the time of the initial outbreak, presents a thornier take of how manhood has evolved in this decades-long quarantine. He's incredibly patient and supportive, tender, even towards Spike in their one-on-one time, but Jamie embellishes Spike's prowess with boorish bravado. It's enough to make the boy more insecure about his survival fundamentals. Taylor Johnson embodies those conflicting sides of fatherhood without either becoming too one-note. Jamie's detached treatment of Spike's ailing mom Isla, Jodie Comer, further drives a wedge between the two, especially once Spike realizes that there's more that both of them could have been doing to help her. Isla experiences near-constant bouts of disorientation and pain, putting Spike into a position of caretaking that further accelerates his coming of age. It's rich work from Comer, and though Isla's scattered mind makes her a slightly less focused character in her own right, her love for Spike shines through her pain. The lessons she has for him end up feeling even more valuable than Dad's tips for taking infected out in one shot. 28 years later's greatest challenge is one of Boyle and Garland's own making. The explosion of zombie fiction inspired by 28 Days Later means a lot of points of comparison for both the action and the drama. The infected action is slick and well staged, but it's here that the hordes of imitators have most watered down Boyle's brand of zombie violence. 28 Years Later introduces some new subspecies of infected that feel like they could have shambled right out of Left 4 Dead, some of which pose questions about the nature of the infection that beg to be answered in the already shot sequel 28 Days Later, The Bone Temple. Most effective are the Alpha Infected, a truly hilarious name for the brutes given the themes Garland's script traffics in. These crazy ripped, nigh-invincible hulks immediately ratchet up the tension anytime they're on screen, with finishers that would make even Sub-Zero exclaim flawless victory in satisfied wonder. A chase scene involving an alpha making its way towards Holy Island results in one of the most unbearably tense moments in the film, like if the oncoming train from that scene in Stand By Me were a naked bodybuilder running full tilt at the leads. A hag-wild encounter, to be sure, but as great as the makeup and digital effects in 28 Years Later are, it's just not as exciting to see a person kill a zombie, or vice versa, as it was in 2002. Boyle and Garland seem content to let their imitators and acolytes try to outdo each other. 23 years later, they're more concerned with matters of the heart. Boyle chases the guerrilla filmmaking textures of 28 Days' groundbreaking digital cinematography by shooting 28 Years Later mostly on iPhone 15 Max Pros. The small size of those phones compared to big unwieldy movie cameras does allow for seriously kinetic coverage during the action scenes. As Boyle himself dubbed it, there's a poor man's bullet time effect accentuating some kill shots that look so cool the first time, but loses just a bit of its luster by its fifth or sixth deployment. That shifty camera move is also infrequently used to accentuate character, like when Boyle wants to underline Jamie's bubbling lowercase r rage by focusing on a knife in his hands and performing just a little shift to remind us that the virus doesn't create fury, it merely amplifies it past all reason. Boyle puts the iPhone camera to work in low-light situations as well, painting Spike's zombie nightmares in angry night vision reds. It's a testament to how far technology has advanced since 28 Days Later that the shot on iPhone acknowledgement rarely feels that relevant, though the professional-grade lenses that Boyle and his frequent cinematographer Anthony D.O.D. Mandel strap to their consumer-grade smartphones probably have something to do with that. They highlight the beauty of the British countryside so well that it never feels like an unfavorable trade for 28 Days' chillingly empty London. Drone shots similarly add a propulsive new view on the action, weaving in and out of groups of infected with dizzying speed. Boyle and Garland seem content to let their imitators and acolytes try to outdo each other. 23 years later, they're more concerned with matters of the heart, but as is often the case in zombie fiction, here, let me just lean in and whisper real quick, a broken bar maybe were the real monsters. 28 Years Later teases out the significance of Kelson, a mysterious outcast drawn as a Colonel Kurtz type with a penchant for burning bodies en masse, and his relatively late entrance opens the door to some of the story's most potent material. Kelson's presence narrows the scope of the third act considerably, but, without being too specific about what he's up to wandering around that there bone temple, it's absolutely the right call for Spike's final test, and Fiennes turns in a simple, yet devastatingly effective performance to augment it. 28 years later finds Danny Boyle and Alex Garland mining the last 2 decades of cultural strife to build a timely coming-of-age story full of beauty and brutality in equal measure. Newcomer Alfie Williams ably shoulders the harrowing plot, flanked on either side by similarly strong performances from Aaron Taylor-Johnson and Jodie Comer. Boyle has plenty of new tricks up his sleeves for how to shoot 28 years later in a way that evokes the spirit of the original without copying it, and the same goes for the action, which feels more like an evolution of 28 Days Later's self-assured perspective on infected carnage rather than an attempt to outdo the running, biting hordes of imitators it inspired. Its scope is much more narrow than 28 Days Later's, but its message is just as powerful. With many years in the making, Danny Boyle still knows how to create even more to be wowed by. That is right, 28 Years Later is a masterpiece, a lot of thrills, chills, and unimaginable realizations of what is on the outside of a detrimental territory throughout the franchise. Boyle is one that always has a knife for creating an environment at risk, assessing the measures, and selecting characterizations that fuel his many suspenseful moments. His mind hits on a one-of-a-kind thriller with 28 Years Later. The apocalypse has transitioned, and the outside has more surprises, but survival is where the writing hits full throttle. This film is the third in the 28 Days Later franchise. This time survivors find themselves on an island. The risk isn't going to the mainland, that is where mutated creatures are still rising and society has adapted to quarantine hardcore. The inhabitants have created barriers around the perimeters of the island. There has also been an adaptation to living with little to nothing of creature comforts. All around though, the biggest task is getting into the mainland. The plague though, has been the focus of the entire franchise, and Boyle keeps realism afloat to maintain the film persistent and provoking curiosity. Is there a cure? What is the new trend of adapting? What is beyond the walls that may be able to help those who are in need? 3 decades later, the new characters of focus are Jamie, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Isla, Jodie Comer, and Spike, Alfie Williams. Jamie and Isla are the parents of Spike. Isla is home in bed with an illness and Jamie keeps her in quarantine because she displays concerning signs of erratic behavior. For Spike though, he feels there is hope, and he takes a chance to try to get his mom help. This means he needs to get to the mainland, but with the island swarming with extremely dangerous and mutated creatures, the wrath of the wild and the pandemic meet a new maker. What is so thrilling and enticing is the fact that Boyle knows how to make his audience think. 28 Years Later loops in a lot of moving parts that correlate to the conflict and premise itself. Overall, the pacing is rapid and wild. The film is written by Alex Garland, and after his Project Warfare, I can tell his themes of continuity play into the pandemic mode to come back with a vengeance. And 28 Years Later, rapid and vivid with sensation, there are secrets to be found and new terrors that are unbelievable. Boyle and Garland are filmmakers intent on providing shock and awe with visually stunning brilliance. Throughout the forests and in encountering the creatures is a world where Spike must be willing to risk death in order to find the help and resources that may or may not exist on the other side. There is the foundation for safety, because it contains brief moments of training before entering the dangerous lands. I do not want to spoil anything, because clearly there is much to be said. So much of the film was a surprise delivered in the unexpected amazement which was in front of me. Through the eyes of Danny Boyle, revelation in uncharted territory is a concept he has cultivated to successfully blow his audience's minds, a broken bar even many years down the line. 4 out of 4 stars for 28 Years Later, directed by Luis Ortega. This is a dark comedy where exploration ends up in a bind. Kill the jockey presents conflicts up front and hurdles along the way after a detrimental disaster. Vivid and thought-provoking, Ortega knows how to create a film that feels two-sided with conflict and identity. The setup uses impairment to its advantage, but when that tactic falls apart, a new journey begins with a desperate search for answers. The film's focus is Remo, Manuel Perez Biscayart, a jockey under a wealthy businessman named Serena. Serena presents himself in a mob-type fashion. He owns horses, and Remo is his top racer. Then there is Abril, Ursula Corbero. She is learning the ropes to be a jockey and is pregnant. The baby belongs to Remo. Life for these characters boils over with politics and anxiety playing a role. When Remo messes up, his life transitions and he becomes rebellious. The title speaks for itself as the story takes a turn. The film paints a portrait of Remo being desperate for success. From the outside, though, it doesn't seem that he can own his feelings. There are moments when he finds himself wondering about his identity. He begins to experience feminine moments in his life after a particular disastrous race. While Serena is trying to figure out what to do with Remo, Remo continues down the path of provoked and erratic behavior. He appears to be coming out of his cage with a vengeance and a classic hint of uncertainty. The dynamic of entrapment is what I found to be extraordinarily compelling in Kill the Jockey. When Remo comes out of his shell, his vindictiveness displays a form of humanistic emotions that are just surreal. It is a portrait of fame, love, and loss living to be earned. The writing clearly focuses on the conflict and dynamics tied to Remo, Serena, and Abril. Abril, however, is the lowest priority, but she serves as an important opener for Remo's doors. With the races being a blur, and with Remo finding himself going crazy, Kill the Jockey leaves audiences with a vibrant sense of curiosity about the eventual consequences. Remo's impact is the main subject of the audacious dynamic and interruption of the criminal setup. The exploration in this film is vivid as it highlights how things for those who work in a livelihood which is out of their control encounter many unseen pressures. Ortega's directing has an effective way of showcasing karma containing many slaps in the face. Remo wants to fulfill his happiness and Abril's happiness, but he also wants to find his own success instead of it being under Serena, given Serena's sacrifices for him in the past. Escaping from the big boss sends Remo on a road of tough choices in Kill the Jockey. This film is diverse and unique. Kill the Jockey has a realistic foundation that I was sold on. As Remo navigates life outside, his search for identity evolves. In a strange way, Remo's journey makes sense because his life has been micromanaged for years. It is an unimaginable awakening with funny moments that grow darker. Ortega presents a life to be learned in a criminal context. 3.5 out of 4 stars for Kill the Jockey. 28 years later is an intense horror that will have viewers' hearts pounding nearly all the way through, though some parts will leave them divided. 28 years later welcomes horror fans back into the world of the infected, set by 28 days later and 28 weeks later. This is not a direct follow-up, in that you can easily understand what is going on without having seen the previous films. It should also be noted that this is the start of a new trilogy, so it is in a way that sets up for what is to come, and that is sure to leave audiences divided. Decades after the first virus outbreak, this film heavily focuses on the quarantined islands of the United Kingdom and a community that has found a way to survive through all the craziness. They are connected to the mainland by a causeway that is completely underwater during high tide, allowing them to heavily defend the one-way in and keep them protected from the infected. Alfie Williams is a star when Jamie, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, feels that his 12-year-old son Spike, Alfie Williams, is old enough to travel to the mainland and get his first kill. It sets in motion a story of terror, determination, and adventure. Without getting too into spoilers, things do not exactly go according to plan for Jamie, which means that Aaron Taylor-Johnson is not as much a part of the film as some might expect. No, he does not die. This is all perfectly fine, however, because he shines when he is on screen, but then passes the torch over to Williams, who absolutely nails being the lead character of the film. He is incredible, nailing every single emotional beat, whether he is scared of a horde of zombies or concerned for his ailing mother, or everything in between. This kid is going places. He was great in his Dark Materials, so it shouldn't come as a surprise, but he has really come into his own here, and I truly cannot wait to see what he brings to the second and third films of this trilogy. 28 years later focuses on an emotional story taking place in a broken world. As with many horror movies, there is a lot more to it than well-placed jump scares, an eerie score, and sound design that is made to put viewers on edge. 28 years later might be scary at times, but it is the emotional story at the core that makes it what it is. Jodie Comer plays Isla, Spike's mother. She is sick, but not with the zombie infection. No one is sure what is wrong with her, but after discovering there is a doctor, or at least someone who used to be one, on the mainland, Spike risks everything to help her. Their bond, and the chemistry between Williams and Comer, is enough to bring some to tears. Hey, I shed a few. This becomes a story about a mother and her son. Amidst all the zombies attacking, these two steal the show. There is no doubt about that. Ralph Fiennes has a smaller, but very important, role, and 28 years later, he is, as always, incredible, leaving a lasting impression. The ending will likely leave audiences divided with impressive cinematography, a phenomenal cast, magnificent sound design, just enough blood, gore, and scares, and a captivating story. There is a lot to appreciate about 28 years later. The end, however, is going to make some viewers feel as if it jumped the shark and will leave them scratching their heads. For me, I rather enjoyed it. The important thing to remember is that this movie is going to lead right into the next one. So, after all the loose ends are tied up and emotions are running high, it makes sense for Danny Boyle to share a glimpse of what he has up his sleeve. The ending is a direct tie into the beginning and belongs there. The only thing I would have suggested would be making it an end credit scene, so it isn't so jarring when it happens. Still, I had a blast with 28 years later. I was on the edge of my seat at times and burying my head in my hands at others. It is scary, intense, and exactly what I wanted. I will be seated for the next one. About 28 years later, Academy Award Day registered winning director Danny Boyle and Academy Award Day registered nominated writer Alex Garland reunite for 28 years later, a terrifying new horror story set in the world created by 28 Days Later. It's been almost 3 decades since the rage virus escaped a biological weapons laboratory, and now, still in a ruthlessly enforced quarantine, some have found ways to exist amidst the infected. One such group of survivors lives on a small island connected to the mainland by a single, heavily defended causeway. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission into the dark heart of the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that have mutated not only the infected but other survivors as well. Raised in a survivors' colony on Holy Island, 12-year-old Spike, Alfie Williams, takes a rite of passage trip to the infection-ravaged English mainland with his dad, Aaron Taylor Johnson. Danny Boyle and Alex Garland have never made obvious choices. Take 2002's 28 Days Later, in which they have Boyle as director, Garland as screenwriter. A revolutionized zombie cinema with sprinting, blood-vomiting hordes. Okay, technically a infected, not reanimated corpse zombies. It reinvigorated not just The Walking Dead, but grand, apocalyptic storytelling in the public consciousness. Over 2 decades later, end-of-the-world stories are old news. A fungal Armageddons and civilization-raising outbreaks are mainstream TV fare. But with 28 years later, Boyle and Garland return. They were largely uninvolved with 2007's Weeks, to breathe thrilling life back into an overexposed genre. There isn't an obvious choice in sight. It begins, for instance, with the Teletubbies' Tinky Winky crashes into frame. Before you can say, "Big hug," a gaggle of Scottish children are besieged by rage-infected adults. A horrifying opening flashback drenched in dark humor. From there, we leap 28 years later, to a British Isles cut off from the outside world. The infected still roam the wilderness. On Lindisfarne, aka Holy Island, lies a survivor's civilization, attached to the mainland by a causeway only accessible when the tide recedes. There lives 12-year-old Spike, Alfie Williams, an outstanding new talent, a boy who's never been somewhere where he couldn't see the sea. It's so big, he gasps when his dad Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, escorts him inland for the first time. As a pure horror experience, 28 years later is ferocious. Daring decisions abound. The infected aren't just stark raging mad, but stark naked. Jodie Comer, as Spike's mother Anna, is ill and losing her grip on reality for much of the film, introduced screaming, "Are you trying to kill our fucking baby, you cunt?" Ralph Fiennes' mysterious Dr. Kelson looks like Colonel Kurtz, but speaks more like Grand Budapest Hotel's Gentile M. Gustav. It's partially shot on iPhones, aping and updating Days' scuzzy digital camcorder look. Kills are captured by bullet-time camera rigs, delivered enduring multi-angle edits, where the original was lean and mean. Stretches of years are soulful, almost mythical in tone, exploring a post-technological Britain rooted in rural traditionalism. Boyle and Garland have much on their minds. 28 years later brims with thematic resonances, a canvas on which to illustrate a national identity crisis. There is a clear Brexit analogy in a country experiencing isolationism and the rage-ravaged Britain secluded from the world, its people secluded from their own land. The distinctly British post-apocalyptic society is part blitz spirit wartime rationing aesthetic, part medieval fortress. Boyle repeatedly cuts to black and white World War footage. Is this the nebulous good old days that some Brits yearned for? Is survival inherently regressive? Years is also about the stories we tell ourselves, the myth-building that creates a nation, a fiction rather than truth. Those heady ideas are richly woven, but worn lightly. Worry not, as a pure horror experience. 28 years later is ferocious, fizzing with adrenaline. The mainland throbs with a pervasive sense of immediate danger when the infected arrive, and boy, do they arrive. It is breathlessly tense. They too have evolved. There are legendish hints that, maybe, the infected are their own civilization now. And like in The Last of Us, there are several kinds, fast ones, slow ones, and most terrifyingly, the hard-as-nails alphas, with a predator-like predilection for ripping spines clean from bodies. The film's opening half, in particular, is phenomenally an electrifying exercise in terror, amplified by young father's astonishing score. Which is to say that the second half doesn't quite grip the throat as tightly. It never bores. Every moment brings a discovery. But by design, this is a wild, unruly odyssey, a coming-of-age tale that zigs and zags. It won't satisfy everyone. There are brief moments of dodgy CGI, an unconvincing herd of deer, minor pacing flubs, and Cummer's brilliant performance is in service of a character that's tough to get a handle on. With 2 more films to come, it closes on a cliffhanger. But this is brave, bold stuff. A full strength Boyle meets undiluted Garland. The A Lust for Life beat soundtracking Spike's introduction conjures big train-spotting energy. Garland's metaphysical annihilation and folkloric men are felt throughout. And still, it's pure 28 the sequel the original deserves, culminating in a bonkers final minute said to be the most divisive ending of 2025, the most unobvious choice in a film full of them. We're blessed to receive it. The sequel we needed is both the film you expect, and the one you don't. There's blood, but also real guts and brain and heart, a visceral cinema soaked in viscera. A little over 2 decades ago, director Danny Boyle and screenwriter Alex Garland scared the bejesus out of audiences with their kinetic reinvention of the zombie apocalypse movie. 28 days later, both as high-intensity nail-biter and sharp political allegory, the 2002 feature remains among the most influential horror of the 21st century. While acknowledging a debt to the maestro, it left George A. Romero's lumbering undead in the dust, with fast-moving flesh-eaters that descended like a swarm on a ravaged Great Britain, isolated from the rest of the world. Emotionally charged, visceral and immersive, the new sequel 28 years later subverts expectations in many ways, not least by making a 12-year-old boy a Spike, played with the poignant balance of vulnerability and resilience by terrific newcomer Alfie Williams as the indisputable protagonist. The movie goes beyond a survival thriller by introducing tender familial drama, a stirring spiritual thread and notes of sly humor. A Shell gas station with a missing AS on its iconic sign is a nice touch, as is an attached diner called Happy Eater. Release date, Friday, June 20th. Cast, Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Jack O'Connell, Alfie Williams, Ralph Fiennes, Edvin Riding, Christopher Fulford, Kai Lewis Perry. Director, Danny Boyle. Screenwriter, Alex Garland. Rated R, 1 hour 55 minutes. This first part of a planned trilogy demonstrates that Boyle and Garland still have plenty of fresh inspiration for pulse-pounding terror. While the director has repeatedly distanced 28 days later from the zombie label, his exciting new Rage Virus installment is in a league not just with his own earlier film but other genre standouts like Romero's Dawn of the Dead and Yeon Sang-ho's Train to Busan. Skipping over the events of Juan Carlos Fresnadillo's 2007 sequel, 28 weeks later, Garland's script starts with an amusing dig at British isolationism, noting that the virus was driven back from continental Europe to be contained on the UK mainland. It's kind of like a reverse Brexit, flooding the island with the unwanted infected and leaving the Brits to fend for themselves. Their shore is patrolled by European military boats. There's an irreverent vein also in the prologue, showing a group of young children trying to ignore the worrying noises coming from adults in the next room while they watch a Teletubbies episode. Those gibberish-spouting creatures, with their fixed smiles, vacant eyes and TV monitors embedded in their stomachs, could be someone's trippy idea of infantilized post-apocalyptic humanoids. When a frenzied cluster of infected, as the virus carriers are known collectively, bursts through the door and the screaming starts, the video image of Dipsy, Lala, Po and Tinky Winky gets splashed with blood. One child, Jimmy, manages to escape, fleeing to a nearby church where it's revealed he's the son of a preacher man. His minister father is clearly deranged, welcoming the deathly mob to the day of judgment, but not before pressing a crucifix into Jimmy's trembling hand, telling the boy to keep it with him always. It's a sure thing that Jimmy will resurface. Spike lives with his parents, Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Isla, Jodie Comer, on Holy Island, a landmass off the northeast coast of England, separated from the mainland by a causeway accessible only at low tide. Isla is largely confined to bed upstairs, feverish with an undiagnosed illness that gives her severe pain and erratic lucidity. The lack of surviving doctors or medical treatments likely means her sickness will have to run its course, one way or another. Members of the tight-knit community living behind fortress walls have designated roles: a farmer, hunter, fisherman, forager, baker, etc. They have fashioned a society along the lines of earlier times, untouched by the developments of the modern world beyond their outpost. In this respect, Boyle and Garland give the new chapters shadings of British folk horror, an aspect enhanced by inserts of footage depicting England at war throughout history, from medieval times to we. Likewise, herds of stampeding deer, flocks of crows overhead, and the eerie placement of Rudyard Kipling's 1903 warfare poem Boots, heard in an unsettling voiceover. Although he's a couple of years shy of the usual age at which islanders undertake their first expedition to the mainland, Jamie decides Spike is sufficiently mature and skilled in archery to accompany him on the crossing and notch up his first kill of an infected. The community's festive send-off identifies this as an important rite of passage, though the gatekeeper reminds Spike that no rescuers or search parties will be sent after colonists that fail to return. While pockets of survivors have stepped back in time, the infected have continued to evolve in new variants, not unlike the cordyceps mutants on The Last of Us. The corpulent, slug-like ground crawlers known as slow-lows are fleshy misshapen blobs with slimy undersides that look like grotesque Botero sculptures. The infected, familiar from the original virus strain, are now sinewy figures wandering the land, feral and naked, their clothes having disintegrated long ago. The most dangerous are the hulking berserkers, more commonly known as alphas, on whom the virus has had a steroidal effect, allowing them to tear the heads off victims and swing them around by their spinal cords. The chief specimen here, played by MMA fighter Kai Lewis Perry, is a massive beast whose brute strength is matched by his cunning, not to mention his pendulous swapper of a penis, a prosthetic that rivals Alexander Skarsgård's in Pillion. All goes well at first as Jamie guides Spike through verdant woodlands and fields, reminding him to aim for the head or heart. The lad soon enough nails his first kill, planting a lethal arrow in his slow-low. The more interesting part of this scene is the evidence of family groups having formed among the infected. The mournful cries of nearby slow-lows draw attention from other infected in the area, who plant themselves along the top of a picturesque hill waiting for the alpha's signal to attack. That stunning long shot is a classic English pastoral scene, its bucolic tranquility broken by menacing savages that look like refugees from an earlier millennium. The flight through the forest is one of many thrilling sequences, with the infected hot on Jamie and Spike's heels, coming at them faster than they can aim their arrows. They take refuge in an abandoned farm building, hiding out in the loft until low tide the following morning. During the night, Spike spots a fire in the distance, which Jamie shrugs off as nothing. At the celebration that follows their hair-raising return to Holy Island, Spike is disturbed by his father's exultant untruths, regaling the crowd with false accounts of his son's heroics when the squeamish boy had been too petrified to be of use during the attack. That confusion about his father's dishonesty is magnified when he observes Jamie sneaking off from the party to have sex with a young village woman, even more so when old-timer family friend Sam, Christopher Fulford, tells him the fire he saw was probably lit by Dr. Curson, Ralph Fiennes, a former physician known for his eccentric ways. Jamie says Curson is insane, but Spike is now convinced he's a liar. Following a bitter clash with his dad, Spike sets up a distraction in order to get his dying mother off the island and travel through dangerous countryside in search of the doctor he hopes can cure her. The bond between Spike and his mother becomes the heart of the film, rendered more affecting by Isla's delirium, which causes her constantly to confuse her son with her late father. But she's sufficiently present for her maternal instinct to kick in during a close call, revealed through the haze of her mind. While the cast across the board is solid, and Taylor Johnson conveys the conflicts of a loving father and husband in dark times, Comer is the movie's standout. Ala slowly and subtly transforms on the mainland from her bedraggled, sickly appearance, becoming more beautiful, as if she's drawing strength from nature. There are gripping interludes in which they travel for a time with young Swedish naval officer Eric Edvin Riding, the last survivor of a patrol boat wrecked on the shores of Scotland. Scotch on the rocks, he waggishly calls it, a reference as mystifying to Spike as the stranger's cell phone and night vision helmet. Eric laments that he should have been a delivery driver, in what seems an odd back to the Cillian Murphy character's profession as a bicycle courier in the first movie. Perhaps the boldest scene takes place in a train carriage, where Riley comes to the aid of an infected in distress, inadvertently alerting the outfit to their presence. The movie is at its most moving when they finally reach Curson and behold the magnificent memento mori temple he has built out of skulls and bones to honor the dead, while he also honors love among the living by protecting Spike and Isla, bringing them peace. That elaborate set is the masterstroke of production and costume designers Gareth Pugh and Carson McCall. The performances of Comer, Williams and Fiennes give 28 years later a soulful core that was also a distinguishing factor in the 2002 original, a testament to the endurance of humanity even in the darkest dystopias. Fiennes is wonderful in the choice supporting role of Curson, half-possessed wild man and half-learned man of science, his body daubed in iodine, which acts as a deterrent to the infected. Shot by Anthony D.O.D. Mantle on the sprawling canvas of the 2.76:1 widescreen aspect ratio often used for IMAX or Ultra Panavision 70. The movie's visual textures are intoxicating. The dynamic muscularity of the camera work is matched by John Harris' similarly agile editing, laced with nerve-jingling smash cuts, and Johnny Byrne's enveloping sound design works in seamless tandem with the wide-ranging score by Scottish indie art pop, alternative hip-hop outfit Young Fathers. Boyle has always been a genius in his inventive use of music. The sequence featuring Iggy Pop's Lust for Life and Trainspotting is an all-timer. Here, he weaves in disturbing passages of ambient synth distortion with propulsive action riffs, bristling with violent drum beats. Any film that includes both the solemn 19th-century Scottish hymn Abide With Me and a ferocious blast of death metal is not playing it safe. One of the chief rewards of 28 years later is that it never feels like a cynical attempt to revisit proven material merely for commercial reasons. Instead, the filmmakers appear to have returned to a story whose allegorical commentary on today's grim political landscape seems more relevant than ever. Intriguing narrative-building blocks put in place for future installments mean they can't come fast enough. By Kate Markey, June 20, 2025. 28 days later was a terrifying horror hit about a viral infection that ripped through Britain, rapidly killing its victims and turning them into angry zombies that spread the infection. Director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland followed that up with 28 weeks later, with the rage virus morphing and spreading to Europe. Now Boyle and Garland are back for a third round, but this time set farther into the future, with 28 years later. Set much farther in the future from 28 weeks later, 28 Years Later is not a true sequel that continues the storyline of 28 Weeks Later, but a new full-on post-apocalyptic story set in the same world. After a prologue that loosely ties this new film to the previous one, in which a boy evades to zombies who kill his parents, the film updates us on the situation 28 years later. The rage virus has been fought back on the European continent, but Britain has been declared a quarantine zone, with the remaining people abandoned to their fate and the waters around Britain patrolled by NATO to contain the virus. Cillian Murphy was the star of the first two horror films, doesn't appear in this one, although he is one of the film's producers. Instead, the main character is a 12-year-old boy named Spike, Alfie Williams, who lives in a colony of survivors on an island off the northeast coast of England. The people on the island are pretty self-sufficient, growing food and raising domesticated animals, with a structured society with assigned jobs and a store of scavenged items for things they can't or don't produce themselves in a pseudo-pre-industrial life. Being an island helps keep them safe, but they also guard against intruding zombie with the force armed with bows and arrows. The island does have an access to the mainland, a causeway that is accessible only at low tide, which they guard with a gate and sentries. The villagers seem to have created a pretty comfortable life, but the one thing they lack is a doctor. Spike lives with his parents Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Isla, Jodie Comer, and his grandfather. Isla is sick with the mysterious illness that comes and goes, leaving her with terrible headaches and confused when she is in the grip of a boat, but a lively, fun-loving person when she's feeling well. With mom not feeling well, Spike's dad Jamie decides his son is ready for the colony's coming-of-age ritual, a trip to the mainland with his father, to kill his first zombie. Although, as the other villagers remind Jamie, the usual age for this ritual is 14 or 15, he insists his son is ready, although Spike seems less certain about this, and mostly trying to please his father. Leaving his ailing mother Ryla in the care of Spike's grandfather, father and son load up their arrows, grab their bows and make the trek across the causeway at low tide to the mainland, with the 4-hour window before the tide covers the causeway blocks retreat. You know something has to go awry, but at first all goes well. Weirdly, while they are on the mainland, Jamie and Spike do not forage for supplies to supplement their meager ones at the store, but instead mostly stick to the forest, hunting slow-moving zombies. They come across some pitiful fat slug-like zombies who crawl slowly across the ground but are still capable of infecting people if they manage to sneak up on one. Spike does make his first kill. He shoot them in the neck. Dad says I bet a few more almost sneak up on Dad while he is focused on coaching his young son. The pair encounter some faster-moving zombies and even spot a dreaded alpha, a large fast zombie with more of a brain than the rest. There are harrowing moments and frightening mad dashes, and they are even forced to hide out in a structure, something they had avoided, and while hiding in an attic, catch sight of a puzzling huge bonfire in the distance, not something likely created by the zombies. Eventually they do make it back to the causeway. Back on the island, the villagers have planned a celebration for Spike, but the boy is both rattled by his experiences and his father's bragging and exaggerating about his prowess as a zombie killer, and sneaks off to see his mother, accidentally glimpsing something that rattles him even more. Back home with his grandfather, Spike learns something his father concealed from him, that the bonfire they saw was probably built by a doctor. When Spike, concerned about his sick mother, asks his father about it, the father insists that the doctor has gone mad and isn't really a doctor anymore. Spike, unsettled by his experience on the mainland and even more by his father's behavior, goes on a quest to the mainland with his sick mother, hoping to find the doctor to cure her. The doctor is played by Ralph Fiennes, in an excellent performance, although we have to wait quite a while for his appearance, which is too brief overall. The rest of the cast is good too, especially young as Spike and the wonderful Jodie Comer as the sick mother, who is charmingly funny, strong-willed and capable in her moments of lucidity. Aaron Taylor Johnson does a fine job as the father, trying to project an bravura image but revealing a selfishness underneath. A surprise character who makes a brief appearance as a Swedish sailor who was stranded on the mainland by a shipwreck and runs into Spike and Isla on their quest. Coming from Europe, where cell phones and other benefits of modern life still exist, he has strange conversations with young Spike, who has known only the medieval-ish world he was born into, making for an interesting bit of post-apocalyptic commentary. 28 Years Later has its moments, with high-tension moments and scary zombie attacks and chases. But there is more that is unsettling and even disturbing in the non-zombie human story that unfolds in this post-apocalyptic world. However, the script has its problems, and not everything that happens really makes sense. For example, why would the villagers risk a trip to the mainland only to shoot zombies, and not forage for supplies, which a high-risk for low-yield decision? There are other odd missteps in logic. A pregnant zombie? While other details are carefully thought out, it gives the story an unevenness, which is exacerbated by its bit episodic nature, with different sections that seem rather disconnected, and finishing with the last scene that mostly just sets up for a sequel. Who knows what they would call that one? On the plus side, along with its fine cast, the film has beautiful, even haunting locations shots, as it was largely shot where it is set, with wonderful north and northeastern locations, although weirdly, they filmmakers chose to shoot on cell phones. The island of Lindisfarne, off the northeast coast of England and connected to the mainland by a low-tide causeway, stands in for the villagers' island. The setting is lush, green and dotted with ruined castles, abbeys and cottages, as well as more modern derelict buildings. 28 Years Later is mixed bag, likely to divide audiences, satisfying those who can't get enough of its zombies more than some others. Still, there are fewer zombie scenes and less pure horror of that type, while it focuses more on the subtler horror of post-apocalyptic life. While it does feature a strong cast and lovely locations, it also has an unsettling, uncomfortable and disturbing non-zombie human story. Add to that, the film's final sequence is pure setup for yet another sequel, which also tends to undermine it, although that might be welcome news to those who crave more rage virus zombies. 28 Years Later opens in theaters on Friday, June 20, 2025. Rating: 3 out of 4 stars. A copyright Kate Markey. If there's one thing we've learned after more than 100 years of horror movies, it's this: you just can't keep a good monster down. That's certainly true of the Golden Age icons, whether it was Frankenstein's monster or Count Dracula. Even in the Silver Age, it was a given that Christopher Lee would be back for blood. It may be more certain now in the age of spin-offs, prequels, and countless sequels. Plus it also extends to those fiends without flesh, like Chucky of Child's Play. And now there's a gender flip on that. Back in 2023, the January film Doldrums, when often the thriller dregs would be dumped into the hungry multiplex, a chiller with a satiric bite brought us a new horror heroine. Well, she's back. Finally, leaping off the toy shelf and into our nightmares comes M3 GAN 2.0. This one begins far away from the sunny California suburbs of the original. In the Middle East, a super-secret agent is on a rescue mission, which goes sideways. She's ignoring all the orders from the U.S. command center, as we learn that the agent is a robot. The story then shifts to an update on the main characters from the first flick. Gemma, Allison Williams, is part of Media Crusade, warning parents about the dangers to their kids in the online world. But she has her own tech company with her loyal staff Tess, Jen Van Apps, and Cole, Brian Jordan Alvarez. Gemma's still the legal guardian to her niece Katie, Violet McGraw, who channels her trauma into her Aikido lessons. Oh, and Jem is in a thriving relationship with a former cybersecurity expert, Christian Aristotle Athari. But what she's focused on right now is the powerful exoskeleton they're trying to sell to the tech billionaire mogul, Alton Appleton, Jermaine Clement. That day doesn't go well, but the night is even worse, when Gemma and Katie are awakened by home intruders. They're not burglars, but rather, agents of the FBI. Their commander, Tim Sharp, tells Gemma that they want information about M3 GAN, whose designs were the basis for their now missing rogue spy assassin Amelia. Ivana Sakno. After the guests leave empty-handed, Gemma is startled when the old M3 GAN program announces her return via the big screen TV and other devices. Soon it becomes obvious that the only way to stop Amelia's path of destruction that leads to a sentient doomsday device from the 1980s is for Gemma and her gang to team up with M3 GAN. But can the devilish doll ever be trusted despite all the fail-safe software that Gemma installs? Will Katie be put in danger once more as they're drawn into a vast conspiracy that could end the planet? These toys aren't playing around. Yes, the old gang is back together again, and their comic timing is just as sharp 2 years later. The leader of the pack is probably Williams, as the frazzled, but full of steely determination, Gemma. She's still the protective mama bear even as she's waddling off endless bits of techno-jargon while making us root for her, as she is often needed to be the voice of reason or a real wet blanket. Her family jewel is the nearly teenage McGraw as the sassy and very proactive, a certain martial arts movie star is her role model. Katie, Epps and Jordan are quite the effective loyal but bumbling comedy team as sidekicks Tess and Cole. The big comedy MVP might just be Clement as the arrogant, abusive snob Alton, who could perhaps be a satiric riff on a real-life Auduber tech bro. We're just waiting and yearning for his sneer to be deleted ASAP. Other comic standouts are Sharp as the gung-ho macho spy chef and Beth Ari as the too sensitive and empathetic nurturing BF Christian. As for the big baddie, Sakno is the face of pure banal evil, with big expressive but vacant peepers as Amelia, the Terminator packaged as a waif-like supermodel. And though she's a mix of stunt folks, puppetry, and git, special kudos should go to M3 GAN's main body double Amy Donald and the supplier of her snarky quips, vocalist Jenna Davis. And this veteran cast is guided by OG director Gerald Johnston, who also collaborated on the script with Akla Cooper, who created the characters with James Wan. They've decided to opt for a completely different tone with this outing, skirting around much of the first one's horror vibe and making a scathing parody of cyber chaos and firing lots of parody salvos at the modern action high-concept blockbusters. While some of the set pieces and sequences take on The Matrix, Johnston and company have some fun with the worlds and imitators of John Wick and James Bond. I'm surprised the big secret villain HQ wasn't inside a dormant volcano. Like aliens, it takes on new targets, though the hardcore fans will enjoy a riff on the meme fodder murder dance of M3 GAN and their aggressive, snarky attitude, guaranteeing that she'll be a popular costume for the next Halloween and beyond. The doll doesn't get all the best gags as the evil A mastermind has a casual sing-song delivery as he tries to be a Michael Scott-style cool, friendly boss. Now, as with most of the straight action thrillers, it piles on the endings along with the henchman bodies literally exhausting us with overkill. But it's easy to forgive its overindulgences when we get a truly uproarious sung scene and a bizarro convention. Sure, the Mission Impossible epics need a good drubbing, and this demonic doll can certainly dish out the burns and cyber side-eye. If you can handle sharp satire and even sharper weaponry, then you may want to click on the upgrade that is M3 GAN 2.0. Powering down a broken bar. A lot can happen in 20+ years. Careers can rise and fall, empires can crumble under their own weight, cult fan favorites can give birth to money-minting franchises, a minor horror subgenre can suddenly become ubiquitous. When director Danny Boyle and screenwriter, and future director, Alex Garland dreamed up 28 Days Later Broken Bar in the early 2000s, there was no zombie entertainment industrial complex outside of the Romero classics and Resident Evil. The notion of a crippling global pandemic was relegated to war room exercises in airport read novels. Intellectual properties was primarily a legal term. A post-apocalyptic landscape that had folks scrambling away from our once friendly neighbors, whose brains were now infected by a contagious mass rage, felt far-fetched enough to be considered fiction. For those of us who remember that first shock to the system viewing of Boyle's 2002 survivalist tale, the idea of returning to this world now was both welcome and worrying. There had been a sequel, 28 Weeks Later Broken Bar, 2007, in which the filmmaker simply lent his name as a producer and handed over the reins to Spanish horror director Juan Carlos Fresnadillo. It was neither a vital continuation of the world building nor a cheap cash-in. You didn't necessarily leave the movie breathless for the next chapter. Not to mention that, though the rampaging rageholics weren't technically zombies, any itch for narratives involving pockets of humanity holding off hordes of the hungry undead would soon be scratched 100-fold. An announcement that Boyle and Garland were considering returning for a third chapter was greeted as great news, but given the oversaturation of similar sagas that had sprung up in the original's wake, would the series itself simply be considered old news? Even if this specific cinematic universe suddenly felt eerily relevant to our own? To be fair, the duo's 28 years later Broken Bar misses syncing up its in-house timeline with an IRL one by 5 years, but who's going to quibble over numbers when that's the only thing that feels off in this revisiting of a rage virus-infected United Kingdom, reuniting not just with Days scribe and producer Andrew MacDonald but also Anthony D.O.D. Mantle, the cinematographer who gave the original its defining digital images of social deterioration. Boyle has built a sturdy bridge between his chronicle of things falling apart at the beginning of the 21st century and the aftermath of that breakdown almost 1/4 of a century into it. That he simply didn't retroactively ruin the first film by releasing a new franchise expanding, Easter egg hunt of an entry just for the sake of it would have been enough. Yet the filmmaker and his collaborators have also deepened their vision of a world on the brink, adding in strong elements of British folk horror, anxiety over good old days nationalism and an emphasis on what happens to a generation growing up in the shadow of normalized chaos. After a brief reintroduction of the pandemic's early days, a house is overrun by the infected, a church becomes the scene of a slaughter, people done get bit. The movie fast forwards to, checks notes, 28 years later, a makeshift community on an island off the northeast coast of England. This is the place that the 13-year-old Spike, Alfie Williams, calls home. His father, Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson, is one of the group's leaders. He's about to take Spike on his first hunt on the mainland, which is only accessible by a causeway that appears during low tide. The boy is warned that, once he and his dad leave the heavily fortified walls of the compound, they are on their own. There will be no rescue parties. Once they arrive at the ruins of what was once Britain, we get a better glimpse of what's happened since we last visited this patch of scorched earth. For starters, the infected have mutated, transformed, and in some selective cases, evolved. You still have the sprinting dead, maniacally rushing and clawing to feed an insatiable appetite they don't understand. But they're also variations known as crawlers, sickeningly bloated creatures that slither on their bellies toward prey. There are emaciated roggers, having been starved due to a long-standing quarantine of the region. There are tribes of fast, feral predators that resemble the second coming of Neanderthals. And then there is whatever has been hanging deer skulls, with full spines attached, to a number of trees that Spike and Jamie come across. That turns out to be the handiwork of the Alpha, one of several apex virus carriers that now reign supreme. This superior species of Homo infectus is stronger, faster and more advanced than your average viral lunatic. He's the next step up the Darwinian chain, and when he begins running after the father and son, they're barely able to make it back to home base alive. Spike has successfully gone through his rite of passage, yet he remains troubled. His mother, Isla, Jodie Comer, is sick. She's not a carrier, but she is feverish, delirious, and losing her grip on reality. Supposedly, there was once a medical physician who fled deep into the land of the living dead and went insane. Spike slips out one morning with his mom when low tide hits, and goes in search of this mythic figure. If there's even a chance this man can cure here in Broken Bar. From here, Boyle throws a number of obstacles in his hero's way, from a rager in the middle of giving birth to a lost Swedish soldier, Edvin Riding, with a shoot-first questions-later way of handling volatile situations. Eventually, they meet the mystery man who answers to the name of Dr. Carlson, who gives off Major Colonel Kurtz vibes. And from the second a bald Ralph Fiennes shows up, covered head to toe in orange iodine, you can feel 28 years later Broken Bar shift gears. You expect him to be one thing, and he turns out to be something else entirely. which doesn't stop the Schindler's List actor from playing this authority figure gone rogue with a gentleman's politeness, a built-in sense of morality and more than a suggestion of menace. It's a great performance predicated on a man teetering on the edge of sanity in an insane world. For a straight display of a Fiennes madness, Carlson ushers in a more meditative tone for the century, which reveals that it is, among other things, a coming-of-age story. Yet this swerve into more emotional territory doesn't dampen the tension or the terror that Boyle remains an expert at conjuring up. If anything, it tacks as a counter-melody to the genre aspects. A sense of paranoia and unease permeates throughout, broken up only by outright attack mode scares. Mantle doesn't replicate his viral feeling imagery from the original, choosing instead to use that diggy visual template as a foundation for presenting a world trying to put itself back together around the remaining patches of rot. That brow-loosening reading of a Rudyard Kipling poem from the film's trailer, which has a backstory that's a horror show unto itself, makes an appearance, as does a snatch of East Hastings, the Godspeed You Black Emperor track that's now synonymous with the first film. It's the closest the movie gets to fan service, though its use at the end of the movie rather than the beginning gives it more of a full-circle heft. Speaking of endings and beginnings, there's a coda that, in the final minutes, introduces a gang of tracksuited characters known as the Jimmies, the names being spray-painted on walls and carved into one poor gent's flesh, hinting that they aren't exactly the good guys, and who will allegedly play a major part in a sequel, The Bone Temple, coming out next January. A third film has also been written, which means that 28 years later Broken Bar functions as both the conclusion of one trilogy and the start of another. Whether it all comes together as a satisfactory whole or is merely a sum of parts extension with little more to say is anyone's guess. Taken on its own, however, Boyle and Garland's trip back to this hellscape makes the most of casting a jaundiced, bloodshot eye at our current moment. Their inaugural imagining of a world torn asunder surfed the post-millennial fear that modern society wasn't equipped to handle something truly catastrophic. This new movie is blessed with the knowledge that something always rises from the ashes, but that the risk of regressing back to some fabricated mythology of a golden age, complete with Henry V film clips and Street George's flags, is there on the surface as well. If post-apocalyptic entertainment has taught us anything, it's that the Walking Dead aren't always the gravest threat. It's those who sacrifice their soul and sense of empathy that you have to watch out for. Discussion N.A. Article MIT Technology Review. Will wrote this lovely piece on us in 2020. Here's how DefBot Extract sees it.